Hey there. So, today, what I want to talk about is a way of considering the architecture of our mind. So, in the other videos, I've talked a lot about human potential. And we think about potentials as like, oh, maybe you can run fast or maybe you're intelligent. But there's a wider variety of these. And also, if there's potentials, could there be potential hindrances? And so, we'll look at that also today. So we'll go way back to discuss what Sigmund Freud considered the basic parts of the psyche, and those would be the id, ego, and superego. So, very simply, to consider what these are, the id is the German word and also, I think, Greek word for it, but it's the itness of us, and it's where all of our drives and urges come from. So, these would be the need to eat, the need to have sex, the need to sleep, and then perhaps many other things. The superego is the role of morality and culture of society put onto us. Obviously, we're going to learn about superego from our parents, but also from the wider society around us. The ego is the space in between, and it's the part of us that we really consider us. Ego in both Greek and German means I. So if you imagine there's a pressure from the id to get all of your needs and desires and things met, and then you have your superego kind of pushing back, your ego lives in a little space in between. And it kind of forces the other two out to form space for you. Now, there's a common metaphor to discuss Freudian concepts, and one of those is the iceberg model. So you have your water level, and you have a little bit of the iceberg that pops up, but most of it's underwater. The underwater part is your unconscious or subconscious mind. And all of your id exists there, and most of your superego exists there also. And then just your ego and a little bit of the superego that pops out of the top. And those are the parts that you're consciously aware of. Now, as we know, we talked about Johari windows, you can discover more and more about yourself and slowly over time make parts of your unconscious mind conscious and use them for your own benefit. So what we're going to talk about today is the role of defense mechanisms working into our conscious mind. So there's common defense mechanisms like rationalization, right? So there's the old Aesop's tale of like sour grapes. You know, the fox wanted to eat a grape, but then realized it couldn't reach it. So then it thought, well, it must be sour anyway. That's the rationalization. Another one is displacement, right? You go to work and your boss gives you a hard time, and then you come home and you kick the dog. So you displace that energy onto something else. One that I'd really like to talk about today is the defense mechanism of sublimation. Now, this is kind of a harder one to conceptualize until you think about it a moment, but I think it's something that we can really use. So you imagine you have an interest or power or pressure to control, right? Do you have an interest in power to desire to control others, an urge to control others? And if you have that and you're using that in just everyday society, you're controlling people around you, they're not going to like you very much, they're going to push back against you, and it's probably not going to work out very well. You're not going to be very well liked. However, if you become a police officer or a correction officer and you're taking that energy and you sublimate it into controlling others in those fields, that'll work out much better for you. And in fact, you'll become a valuable member of society. I know a person who has just kind of this natural curiosity for pus and blood. Right now, we know that society will say pus and blood are, quote, bad things and will discourage us from playing with pus and blood. Now, if that person becomes a medical professional and spends a few hours a day helping people with wounds, right? They're playing with pus and blood, they're getting paid well for it, and they're doing a service to society. So they sublimated that urge into something that's effective. Now, another one, if you're a person who perhaps for whatever reason has a strong kind of like urge to tinker with very small, fine things, that might actually cause you trouble in everyday life because you might be taking things apart or fixing things or just kind of getting lost in it. But if you had a technical career in, like, say, computing or engineering, where you're using that urge to do something productive for society, that would actually work out quite well for you. So, with all that being said, you can actually then imagine perhaps a more vulgar version of it. Imagine a person who has an instinct to play with gore and blood and just kind of violent, right? Now, the first thing that comes to my mind are axe murderers and serial killers, and that's a problem. But what if they sublimated it to become a butcher and they're working at a butcher house, right? That's a job I wouldn't want to do it. But for that person, it really fits. And in fact, they will be very successful at it and do the rest of society a boon. So, all that being said, when we think about our potentials, we think about the areas where we can really kind of let our greatness shine to become the best version of ourselves. If we have an urge that is not socially acceptable, we can allow it to sublimate. Now, typically, sublimation is considered to be an unconscious thing, but as you explore yourself, you'll find, quote, shadow parts of yourself or parts of yourself that you've pushed away, right? So that might be considered denial, or we also know the term repression, so you're kind of pushing it out of your consciousness. If you become aware of it, allowing it to have a space that is effective, and figure out where is that space and how do I do it. So, all that said, notice the role of judgment there. If you judge a certain urge or energy, it'll be seen as a bad thing. If you looked at it for its effectiveness and you allow it a space in your life to do something helpful, it is then becoming a potential. And the ideal scenario is you find a way to allow as many of your urges and potentials to manifest and actualize themselves in your everyday life. So I imagine that'll bring up some questions. If you have them, feel free to send them my way.